Good afternoon and a warm welcome to all our guests. Our webinar today touches upon the crucial topic of customs and GST. My name is Meera Dalvi Sani and I'm the Regional Director of the IGCC Pune office. I would also like to extend a very warm welcome to Sandeep Sachdeva and Rinku Panbudde, representing Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan attorneys, our knowledge partners for this session. Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan is a full-service law firm based in India. The firm has offices in 12 cities and over 400 professionals specializing in areas such as corporate and commercial law, dispute resolution, taxation, and intellectual property. Sandeep heads the tax practice in Pune and is a qualified chartered accountant and lawyer. He has over 17 years of experience and advises corporates on various tax issues and has also represented clients for matters in tax courts. Rinku is a chartered accountant and has 7 years of experience in supporting clients on advisory and litigation matters in GST and other indirect tax laws. Indirect taxes, unlike its name, has a direct impact on transactions and the way business functions. Recently, various significant developments have taken place, especially under customs law. Similarly, GST is a hot topic, constantly being debated about, and more so during the audit season. As always, we will have a Q&A session at the end, and participants can already post their queries in the chat box on the right-hand side of their screens. I request everyone to please post clear queries so that we can give you the best possible guidance. Thank you very much for your cooperation. I now invite Sandeep and Rinku to commence their address and interaction with our guests. Sandeep, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Meera, for this introduction. I hope I'm audible clearly.
Yes, Sandeep, please go ahead.
Okay. Thanks to the Indo-German Chamber for giving us this opportunity to be here and share our thoughts. And thanks to you all for joining. So today we'll discuss some of very important developments which have come in customs. Mover scheme we'll discuss. We'll also discuss about this country of origin related change which has come, which has having huge impact with respect to this FTA exemptions, which all importers are claiming wherever those exemptions are available. We'll discuss a couple of hot issues on GST. So maybe last 10 minutes or so we'll have Q&A, and we will kind of in the meantime you can kind of share your question in the chat box. We will just collate that. So on customs, you all know that custom had not been combined with the part of the whole tax transformation which took place in the form of a GST. Custom has been separated, and rightly so. But a lot of evolutions are still happening in a custom side, and the biggest reason of such kind of changes is our international commitment. India is a member of WTO. I think we are one of the founding members of the WTO, and being a member of WTO, and we are committed for our commitment given in a WTO, and that's where if it is 2011 when this self-assessment has come in customs. Earlier it was not kind of a self-assessment kind of a scenario in customs. It was every bill of entry used to be sort of assessed by the customs, and now you file it, and all these things have come because of our WTO commitment. In fact, our GST also, there is a huge amount of international pressure. Because of that, India has really got into GST, because if you see our GST law is also completely aligned the law which we have in Europe, Australia. I'm not talking about US, but in Canada and even in some other countries. So our tax laws are completely globally aligned, And in our foreign trade policy, whatever we are having, where the various schemes, the government of India has been giving sort of incentives to the exporters, be it MEIS, be it EPCG, be it EOU, SEZs, etc. India lost one round of battle in WTO with respect to these incentives, because India is no more a poor country. India has breached that threshold, and once you breach a particular threshold, then you cannot give those incentives what you were basically giving, and that's why you all have must have seen our MEIS, a lot of restrictions has of late come, and now they are in said that from 1st of September to 31st of December you can only claim MEIS only of 2 crore. So we are anticipating that in the new foreign trade policy, probably we will not see the EPCG scheme the way it is today. We will also not see the EOU related incentives what are available today the way they are today. We may not see in that fashion. And MES anyway is going to be kind of replaced by remission of duty scheme, which is maybe coming. It just has come for a textile, and but for the other products will also be coming in some time. So since India lost one round of battle, and based on our reading and understanding of our agreements, what India has signed in WTO, we are not having very high hopes that India will eventually win through. So that is where the whole trigger has taken place, and government thought, how do we find a path to incentivize the exporters, to incentivize the campaign of Make in India. And that's where, since the Make in India is a theme of this whole government since 2014, so just to give kind of a boost to this Make in India, they made few changes in the Customs Act, and they brought something called a mover scheme. Just to tell you, this scheme is not maybe new in India, or maybe it was there, but in a limited way. But this scheme is very well implemented. Similar sort of things are there in US. It is there in Australia. It is also there in Malaysia. So India has basically replicating the model which these countries have basically done it. So the purpose behind this scheme is to make sure that you should not be paying customs duty at the time of import of the goods. Government wants, if you are a manufacturer and if you comply with certain conditions, then you can bring the goods in your factory without payment of customs duty, and it will be like a bond transfer in a bond. You will be, once you get a permission of a private bonded warehouse, and also you get a permission of doing certain manufacturing activity based on the permission. But once these permissions have been given, you will not be liable to pay customs duty at the time of import. You bring the goods in your factory, and whenever, I'm repeating my point, whenever you will be clearing your goods from your factory, only at that point of time the liability to pay customs duty will arise. So I'll just give you an example. Say from 1st of April 2020, you brought 1 lakh unit of a particular part, and 30,000 unit you have used it to manufacture a product, say in the month of June. Your liability to pay customs duty will arise on 30,000 unit once these goods have been manufactured, used in manufactured, and manufactured products have been cleared out of your factory for domestic. But if these 30,000 units are getting exported, then you are not at all liable to pay, any sort of customs duty the way you have been paying today. So it is a complete deferment of scheme, but it is a complete waiver if you are a manufacturer. So the question arises whether there will be any export obligation, or whether there will be any there is a need that you should be only exporter, or you should have some export? The answer is no. It is not you. There is absolutely no requirement that you have to be exporter. There is absolutely no requirement that you need to maintain NFE, or you need to meet the export obligation, or you should have some minimum investment. Like in our SEZ, there is a rigid criteria that no, you should be having this much of area, much of space. Only then we will give you SEZ permission. Otherwise, you will not give you SEZ permission. Any of these criteria and any of these things are not there. So there is no string attached. So there is no restriction that you should be only clearing domestically. In our EOU scheme, if you remember, we had a restriction that only 50% of your export turnover go into the domestic side. That sort of restrictions are also not there in this. So even if you are not at all exporting 1%, then also you can get the benefit of this particular scheme. But who can get it? You have to be a manufacturer. A service provider cannot get it. A trader also cannot get it. But if you are a manufacturer, and apart from doing manufacturing, if you are doing some, there are some spares going, being a manufacturer, you manufacture a product, and along with that, there are some spares going. Like I am a car manufacturer for a minute, and I buy a toolkit. I don't manufacture, but toolkit, I don't do anything on that. I send toolkit along with my finished product. So that will also be treated as your manufacturing activity. And accordingly, if the toolkit is also going on which you are doing nothing, if the toolkit is going along with the car, you will definitely be getting the benefit of this particular scheme. So this is a excellent move and excellent initiatives by the government of India. Now, how the procedure be? You will be importing the goods, and the goods will come to your private bonded warehouse. You are not going to pay any BCD or IGST. If these goods have been exported outside India, then you will not at all liable to be. But if these goods are cleared, finished goods are going in the domestic market, then only this particular liability with respect to your imported product will come. So therefore, you will be clearing in a domestic side. You will be paying one customs duty. You will also be paying local GST, whatever is applicable. So whatever GST scheme is available to you, that same scheme will continue to be available even in this. 2-3 questions came, and in fact, multiple questions came. One question is, can I continue to procure domestic goods the way I am? The answer is yes. So for you are as if any other DTA unit. Generally, we saw in EOU scheme, once you become a bonded warehouse, then you cannot bring duty paid goods. No, absolutely, there is absolutely no restriction. You can bring duty paid goods. You can also choose that out of your 100 imported products, you want to first choose, like I will choose for 10 products in the beginning. You choose for 10, for 90, you don't choose, no problem. You can choose for capital goods. You may not choose for raw material. That is also no problem. In fact, for a capital goods also, you are not at all liable to pay customs duty if you are eligible and if you get a permission to under forming part of this scheme. So therefore, if you bring the capital goods in your factory, say on 1st of April 2020, I just take example, and these goods are will be with you for say 7 till 7 years, you are not at all liable to pay any customs duty. After 7 years, whenever these goods will be going from your factory as a scrap or as a you don't need it, or you're going for some upgradation or whatever it is, then only that sort of whatever duty waiver you got it, that you have to pay. People ask the question, can we get a benefit of depreciation? So there are 2 types of depreciation benefits. One benefit we saw as a depreciation in our EOU kind of scheme, where the scheme says that if you bring the capital goods today, and at the time when you are selling the capital goods, then you will be giving a duty concession based on the depreciation norms. So ultimately, people end up paying finally on a depreciated value when these goods have been going out of the factory. That relaxation is not available in this scheme as of now, but it is an evolving scheme, and it is being given effect from 1st of October 2019. Is already 1 year, virtually 1 year has gone, but now kind of industry got a very traction to, and everybody is seriously looking for this particular scheme. But another depreciation is income tax depreciation. income tax depreciation benefit will be available because it is not a waiver of a liability, it is a deferment of the liability. So therefore, assuming we are importing a capital goods of rupees say 10 crore rupee, and on that there is a basic custom duty or IGST put together is 2 crore rupee, which I not got. My depreciation calculation under income tax will be on 12 crore. 2 crore will be a deferment, that sort of a thing. You will get it under this particular. And on raw material also, you are not at all liable to pay. So then what are the advantages? A huge cash flow advantage to you. Two, it is not that custom is going to put their own people in this particular premises. No, your own person will be, they will nominate one person as a warehouse keeper, which you have to give name to the customs. And once that person is nominated, he has to file a monthly declaration that how many units have come, how many units have gone, how many units have kind of used. So it is a complete simple. It's not as rigid as we saw in EOU, as we are seeing in SEZ. In SEZ and EOU, a lot of permissions are needed to do so many things. And at the very same point of time, it is very flexible, very flexible. One client asked us a question that we are into an industry who are into a customized business. So therefore, once they will make an import, they may use it in 6 months time, they may use that product in 1 month time, they may use it in 2 years time, but they don't know when they are going to use it because they are such in a customized agency. But when we look at this kind of, in our advance authorization, there is a time limit. Within 18 months, you have to export back. Okay. And EPCGs also, there are time limits, etc. But from this point of view, there is absolutely no time limit. So that is a wonderful advantage available. It's not only for export, even for a domestic side. Then what do we need to do? You should have a robust digital record, because your inventory management system has to be top class. If there are challenges with respect to your inventory management, then it is going to be a mess. Because once because everything is mapped in your system, so your system should be able to help you out that these many goods have gone. We received so many queries from the client that my SAP may or may not be supporting to this, because in our SAP it is basically written as if it calculates the landed cost. It is not, we don't maintain a record of my original customs duty, what I was supposed to pay, etc. I need to customize the SAP. Definitely, you need to do that. But if inventory control system is there, then I don't think there is any difficulty to get this thing implemented. So what you need to do, you need to file a monthly return. So monthly return will be filed by you. You need to give a triple duty bond. They are not asking you for a bank guarantee. They are only asking a bond. So therefore, from that point of view, also it is not a kind of difficult thing, and it's not having any lot of financial impact to you immediate basis. Wastage, yes, you need to maintain a record that how much wastage has arisen with respect to your domestic sale and how much wastage has arisen with respect to your export sales, because there are different taxation system with respect to your domestic sale and with respect to your export sales. So therefore, the wastage norms have to be very clear. If your BOM is clear and you know that how much wastage must have come, and accordingly on that wastage you need to pay applicable customs duty. So from that wastage point of view, there are sort of things you need to maintain. And your standard input-output norms is very important. It's not that I'm talking about the standard input-output norms notified by the government. No, your own self-certified input-output norms. So based on that, the government will rely on you. So there are going to be audits. How that periodicity of that audit is basically based on your risk, that how much risky assessee you are in the eyes of customs. If you are a risky assessee in the eyes of customs, then periodicity of that particular thing will be little higher, but otherwise it's going to be routine the way it is happening in AEO schemes and other schemes, etc. You need to take an insurance. there has to be a physical security of the stock. That sort of a thing you need to sort of maintain it. So if you are able to do that, then there is absolutely no further challenge with respect to this particular scheme. You go to the next slide. Yes. Now, what are the open issues? Nothing comes without a pain. Basically in tax laws, if you are looking for any sort of incentives, there will always be some area where we need to be sort of a conscious and clear. It says that scheme says if you export it, then there is a duty waiver. But scheme is not very clear. If you supply to SEZ or EOU, then what is going to happen? So these are some of the open area. So scheme is not saying that we treat, if you are supplying to SEZ, we treat as if it is exported and therefore you are not liable and there will be complete waiver. Ideally, yes, for SEZ purposes, there should be, but the scheme is not very clear with respect to this particular thing. Alignment with ongoing benefits, in our view, should be possible if you are already running EPCG licenses, running advanced authorizations, absolutely no problem. Even though it's not written very clearly in the reading of the scheme, but in our view, definitely these particular benefits you can continue to avail it. Warranty clearances, nothing is written in a scheme, but like it should be available for a warranty clearances also. You should be in a position to get the benefit, but yes, not very clear coming out from the particular scheme. And I'm telling you, it's an evolving thing. It's not that something which has really reached to a level that no, nothing more changes will come. Industry is just now started looking at it very closely, but I am sure there will be a lot of iterations which will come. Job work, you can definitely send the goods out of the job work. There should not be any problem. But if you are a pure job worker, can you get the benefit of the scheme? Looks like no from the reading of the scheme, but sending the goods out of the job work activity, there should not be any sort of a problem. So similarly for repair and maintenance also, there should not be any problem. What is the meaning of other operation? Many people ask that if we are only manufacturing and doing job work, whether the benefit should be available. These are some of the open area and vague area, but sending goods out of the job work activity, we don't foresee there is any challenge in this particular scheme. Now, what are the pain points? One should definitely be aware of what are the pain points. One, as I mentioned, for capital goods, you will not get a drawback. You will not get a depreciation for the purpose of calculating this duty. But income tax depreciation will certainly be available. Waste, in case of wastage, you need to have a sort of a good robust system. But if there is no robust system, then it's going to be very painful thing. And because the government audit will come, they ask, and if you are not able to justify, then there can be tax demands, etc. This zero rated or deemed export status, like we have in SEZ, in our GST, whether the supply made to EOU, it is being treated as a deemed export, or supply made to SEZ, it is being treated as a zero rated. Whether that sort of a status is available for the people who are taking the benefit of this scheme, the answer is no. You will not get an all industry rate drawback, but special brand rate, definitely you can get it. Filing of bill of entry for each clearance. This is another pain point, because the infrastructure from the industry side, probably it is not there to do such kind of things, and that sort of a thing, a lot of changes you have to sort of make. So net I see there is a huge advantage. Before I conclude about this, I will say that it is not that for lock, stock, barrel you need to go for this scheme. You can choose. If you are having multiple plants, you can choose for one simple plant, and then you can get into that, replicating to the complicated sites. If you are having huge volume of import, you can start with ABC analysis, high value, low low volume product first, and then you can start replicating it. You can start with the capital and then slowly start replicating to the raw material. So there are sort of thought process avenues people can evolve from one to one. I am sure there are ways to kind of reach that. So that is what this mover scheme is. We will take up the question about the mover scheme in the last. Now I would request my colleague Rinku to explain to you what are the changes which has come with respect to this country of origin rules. Thank you.
Good afternoon all. I hope I'm audible. So as we discussed about the mover scheme, it is a beneficial scheme. But the next topic which we are going to cover is the origin rules. There have been some amendments in the customs origin rules. So the rules which they have amended, the new rules that they have brought are a little bit stringent, and therefore one needs to know what are the pain points, what all hygiene checks needs to be done. So before getting into that, I'll just briefly touch upon what is this concept of origin rules. So customs give various exemptions and on import of goods. One of such kind of exemptions is what we generally call free trade agreements. It is mainly country specific. There are different agreements. Say India is having agreement with Singapore, and so there will be a free movement of goods. There will be lesser duty as compared to if I'm importing from, let's say, US. There will be a higher duty, but if I want to import from Singapore, there will be a lesser duty. So there are multilateral agreements, bilateral agreements, which we call it as a free trade agreements under the customs legislations. Now there could be a possibility that, as I said, if I want to import from Singapore, I could divert the shipment. And let's say there is no FTA agreement with the neighboring nations of Singapore, for example, let's say Korea. So what one can do is one can send the goods from Korea to Singapore, and then the goods can come from Singapore to India, and accordingly I can enjoy the reduced rate of duty. So in order to curb such kind of practices, all the nations generally what they follow is what we call as the origin rules. So one needs to see whether the goods were originally produced from the country where the goods are ultimately exported. It should not be happening that people are trying to take the undue advantage by merely diverting the goods, diverting the movement of the goods. So that's why they have introduced this origin concept, and how to identify where the goods have been originally manufactured in the country of export. So there have been various conditions which they have mentioned. There are various rules. For example, if I just take a very simple example, let's say minerals would be it is something which will be extracted from the mines, and if that particular mineral is being sold, it is very easy to identify that it is being ultimately procured from the particular country from where it is being exported. But that is not so simple. If we see maybe very simple another example, if you take, let's say, a TV or a mobile. So as we all know, one needs to the product to make your product competitive, you need to follow two fundamentals. One, the costing, the procurement of the raw materials, how cost effective that is, and second is the quality also. So therefore there could be procurement from different suppliers, and then ultimately you are manufacturing the end product and then selling it. So there could be a possibility that the goods raw materials are imported from different countries also. Therefore they have put some specific restrictions which we call it as value addition, and once the goods are being kind of manufactured or produced, and then there is a possibility that the classification of the product from raw material to the manufactured product would also change. So there are different benchmarks which they have laid down in order to identify where the goods have been actually produced, what is the origin of the end product which is being ultimately supplied. So these are some of the the broad principles which are generally available in the foreign trade free trade agreements. So having given this particular background regarding the foreign free trade agreements, so what generally used to do was the exporting country, not the exporter, the exporting country used to issue a certificate, which we generally call it as certificate of origin, and on the basis of that certificate of origin, the importer will show that certificate to the customs officer, and then you will be eligible to claim a reduced rate of duty. That is the customs exemption which we are talking about. Now earlier that was only having a certificate of origin was sufficient, but now the government has made certain amendments in the customs, and the government is saying we are not going to get influenced only from the certificate. The importer, the Indian importer, also needs to take equal responsibility and onus regarding the factual details of the goods, that the goods which Indian importer is importing is satisfying the criteria. Earlier I was having a certificate and I was not concerned whether the criteria are met or not, but now the onus has been shifted on the importer. The government has amended these rules and introduced these rules, and from 21st of September, 2-3 days back, the rule has came into force. The rules are one of the important points which they are saying is that the importer needs to take reasonable care. Now what does the term reasonable care means? You have to vouch for the authenticity of all information what the exporter and the exporting country, the certificate, whatever has been mentioned, you have to take complete responsibility. You have to vouch for that. So if you want to vouch, the responsibility is now on you. The point is that you need to understand how the manufacturing activity is being done in the country where the goods are manufactured. It is not very simple. It is not going to be a very simple exercise. So just to give you a very a very simple example again, let's say I am importing the goods from, let's say again, Singapore. Okay, the Singapore country might be the exporter from Singapore. He might be procuring some goods. He might be having his own goods. He might be procuring some raw materials from some other countries also. And what is his manufacturing process? What all value addition he is being doing? What is the amount of labor? What is the amount of indirect goods, raw materials, packaging materials? Entire information has to be made available to you. Then only you will be able to explain the entire process. What is the value addition? From where the goods have been procured by the exporter. It is not so simple that you are telling to the customs that I am importing from Singapore. No, not like that. You have to also tell to the customs that your foreign exporter, from where he has procured the goods. So this is going to be going to be a lot of information collation which the Indian importer now has to do, and the time limit is 5 years. Generally in all indirect tax we have a period time limit of 5 years. So from the date of filing the bill of entry, the customs can go back and maybe 5 years down the line they can ask you again that I want this all kind of information 5 years later also. So it is high time for you to identify what all informations are required as on date. And the powers which they have been giving to the customs department is also huge. The earlier the powers were there, but they specifically introduced certain more powers which they have given to the customs, that they can seek information from you. They in fact the bill of entry format itself has been amended, where you need to report that which exemption you are claiming, from which country, who is the exporter and everything. And you also need to mention how are you satisfying that the criteria for country of origin rules are actually being met or not. So they have the power to seek information. In fact, they can go back to the exporting country. They can go back to the exporting country, not the exporter but the exporting country itself, and they can seek certain information if they want. And if let's say if they're asking you certain information and you are not able to provide, which if the information is not handy available with you, then they may probably suspend the preferential treatment also. And then the whole supply chain will be going for a toss, because you will not be able to clear your consignments and the whole supply chain will be at halt. So if you want to clear, then probably you need to give a security deposit, and in the rules also they have said instead of security deposit, the customs may also ask you to make full payment of duty instead of seeking some kind of security deposit. So I don't see that the customs will be behaving very importer friendly, and I see that they may in fact in all cases they may ask that you need to pay the differential duty if you want to get the goods cleared. And in fact then till the whole verification process is being done, the customs collating the data, etc., they may suspend, and then if they come to a conclusion that you are not eligible, maybe due to whatever reasons, they may deny the claim. So I'll just highlight a few instances what could be the challenging situations. The biggest challenge which the importers would be facing is to obtain detailed information. As I said, you need to understand the whole manufacturing process, value addition, the change in classification. And when I say classification, the classification is not of the exporting nation. The classification has to be of India. Okay, as various nations follow different HSN. Some countries follow 6-digit, we follow 8-digit. There are countries which will be following 10 digits also. So the classification has to be as per the Indian standards. And in fact, if you'll see, yesterday I was seeing the Singapore Treaty. It is specifically mentioned there that the classification has to be the Indian classification. Then only the Indian customs will be able to know whether the classification is also correct or not. Another point is that the confidentiality. How are because the exporter would also not be very friendly if it is a related party transaction. Probably that would be a good case, but why would someone want to share the entire data, that what is the value addition, from where he is importing the raw materials, because he would also not want to disclose it to you. Probably you can also import the same raw material from his suppliers, and then you can yourself manufacture the goods. Why you need to buy it from the supplier? So all of this commercial angle will also come into picture. And as I said, there the preferential benefits can be denied. Maybe your goods can be stopped. So therefore it is very high time for the Indian importers who all are claiming this free trade agreement benefits, that complete information, complete data needs to be collated. The onus is not now on the Indian importers. It is not, the responsibility is not only limited to having a mere certificate, but to have complete sufficient information, and as I said, reasonable care. So what would be the term reasonable care? It will be depending upon situation to situation. Okay, so it is a very subjective term. Okay, or which requires judicial analysis also. It is not very simple thing. We can say that I am having the data, what the supplier has provided it to me, but you need also to take a reasonable care as a judicial person would step into the shoes that it is going to be my own product when the goods are being sold. So these are some of the challenges which one needs to take care about. And as I said, having entire data is important. You need to have a dialogue with your exporter that all of these informations you need to have. You also need to apprise your CHA so that he should not mention any any certain information which you may not be able to do later. So your CHA also needs to be probably updated in this regard. Maybe you may also want to revise your terms of the purchase and to have a periodical review of data, whatever is the the goods, how the goods are going to be procured. Having said this, I will close this topic. I'm sorry, this is actually a huge topic, but we are just touching upon what could be the possible implications by introduction of these rules. Just one point I like to highlight: they have introduced one Form I in the rules, and if you have a look at the Form I, they have specifically said that from where the goods are procured, how the goods are manufactured, etc., and the value, quantity, etc. So HSN, etc. So entire thing one needs to have collate, because it is not that today your shipment may be released, but maybe after some time they may get back to you and ask for this data. So now I think this is what I wanted to just touch upon, the Carota rules, this origin rules. Now after customs, I will like to touch upon a very interesting topic, which we I'm sure many of the listeners would also be aware about this intermediary concept, because there are many companies. Every foreign company wants to sell goods in India nowadays. India being one of the emerging leaders, everyone wants to sell their goods in India, and so therefore we have seen a lot of foreign companies are opening up their Indian subsidiaries. And the Indian subsidiaries are generally there are two types of arrangement. One where Indian subsidiaries are only doing sales and marketing. They are not interested in doing something more than merely advertising, and and that's the role which they are interested to work upon. But there is a separate arrangement. Generally people what they do was they imported the goods, then they sold it in the Indian market, but that involved customs. So they do not wanted to get into that whole intricacies of customs, which we have already seen. So therefore they kind of what they did, that they concluded the deal with the Indian customers, the Indian subsidiaries. They solicited the Indian customers, they completed the whole deal, and then the goods were finally sold by the foreign company to the Indian customer directly, and then the Indian subsidiaries were getting the commission. So this particular activity was generally said to be an intermediary. So when it was only a sales and marketing function, it was qualifying as an export of service. But the government, they said, when you are acting something more than a mere sales and marketing, you are stepping into the shoes of an intermediary. And in case of intermediary, this service will not be treated as export, and you need to pay tax in India. There have been a lot of disputes in service tax regime also. So therefore the terms of the contract needs to be very clear, whether what is your role, what are you actually doing, and it should also be in line with the real function what you are going to do in India. Having said that, in service tax, when the GST law was introduced, this legacy issue is still continuing. But one more important point which came was, what is the nature of tax which you need to pay? Is it going to be a CGST, SGST, assuming you are an intermediary, or an IGST? If you'll read section 13, section 13.8 talks about the place of supply of intermediary. It says the location of supplier. So is it the case that the location of supplier of intermediary is also in same state, and the place of supply is also in same state, and therefore is it going to be a intra-state supply, and you need to pay CGST, SGST? Is it the case? So many people are now in today's date, they are treating it as an intra-state supply by reading section 8. That section 8 says where location of supplier and place of supply is in same state, it is an intra-state. But if you see section 8.2, which I have also highlighted here, it starts with the word subject to the section 12, and section 12 is dealing with a domestic supply transaction, whereas in case of intermediary, the place of supply is dealt with by section 13, which talks about cross-border transactions. So therefore you cannot apply section 8 here, and you have to you are left with no other option but to apply rule section 7.5, which says any transaction which is not a intrastate will always be an interstate transaction. So you need to pay IGST, and it is not so simple that you can construe your service and pay a CGST, SGST. Rather you may need to pay IGST. So that is one point which I thought is important for to address you. And I'll just end my point by touching upon the point of refund. So what will happen if you have already paid the tax, CGST, SGST instead of IGST? Whether the time limit of 2 years will apply, or whether that time limit may not apply, that is something which needs to be examined in detail. There is something in the section 50 which says that 2 years would be applicable from the date of order also. Probably the benefit can be taken from the date of order of the GST officer, or maybe the order of the court, or whether 2 year is not at all applicable. These all things needs to be seen. But the important point is, first of all, you need to identify whether you are really an intermediary or not, and what tax you have paid, and then subsequently a refund, whether you need to file a refund or not, that can be examined. So I'll end my part here, and I will hand over to Sandeep sir, so that he can take upon the other interesting issues in GST. Thank you.
Thank you, Rinku. I think this is very two important point. Country of origin, the life is not going to be the same and simple. And wrong payment of CGST, SGST vis-a-vis IGST, time limit. We are getting many queries and questions from many of our clients on this, because this is evolving thing people are correcting. But to get a refund is like putting a hand in the mouth of a lion and extract it. So it's not easy from the tax authorities, but if we are clear and we have done our homework well, then it is very easy. Okay, so we'll move forward. We'll have few minutes before we leave the floor open for questions. I'll just briefly touch upon some of very interesting point. We all know that under section 16(4), the time limit, we can get a credit, and September is a kind of a last month anyway. You all are conscious and aware of it, but you can take credit if your vendor has paid a tax, and for that there is a reconciliation and there is a restrictions, etc. And if your vendor has not paid, then it is a failure of government. They did not have a good mechanism, but they put a whole onus on the industry. And they given some percentage, earlier 20%, now 10%. So our advice to all our clients is, whenever your vendor has not paid the tax, take credit and reverse it if you don't want any sort of litigation. But if you don't take credit, the time limit will go. So therefore, you take it and reverse it, and don't miss this opportunity. Many of our clients are filing writ in the High Court challenging division. Your call. You want to go and file writ, but otherwise don't lose the credit, take it and reverse it. A lot of questions are coming on scrap. Can I take a credit on inputs which got scrapped? Certainly you can take a credit. There is absolutely no difficulty. And even on write-offs, so long as the goods are with you based on your own inventory management, inventory mechanism, or inventory accounting, you are doing some write-offs, the credit will not go away. The situations are very different what we saw in excise. Goods used destroyed in testing also you can definitely credit, but there are some scenarios like, I buy a car and I do the testing and then I destroy the car itself. Can I take credit on car? There are restrictions to take credit on motor vehicle. Otherwise, for rest of the thing, there is absolutely no difficulty. Credit note reversals and credit note, debit note, all sort of questions which are coming. Here also there is a lot of possibility to take a view, not kind of like the lose-lose scenario. We can definitely explore some win-win scenario also with respect to this credit note, a time limit and credit note reversals, etc. 180 days, if you're not paid the amount to your vendor for 180 days, can you continue to take a credit? But if your closing balance is there with you, we don't foresee any difficulty with this particular thing. So you need not be paying interest if your closing balance is more than the credit that you have taken. Classification is a one area we saw, at least for last 1.5 years, a lot of questions have come with respect to port and with respect to domestic. A lot of classification disputes are coming up, and because the rate difference is huge, 18% vis-a-vis 28% in many scenarios, especially in the auto sector. Auto sector, this is a kind of a big issue. Cross charge also one of the area, what to do cross charge, what not to do, whether the CSR expenses also need to be cross charged. A couple of interesting scenarios and questions coming in cross charge. If there are any specific question, we can take it up. And then treasury function. This is common across the industry, be it a manufacturer or a kind of a service industry, to invest your money into some securities, shares, and do some sort of a treasury function so that your idle money is generating some revenue for you. People are not reversing appropriate credits with respect to the treasury operations, and huge demand notices are basically coming from the revenue side. I think this is an area where she has to sort of look at it. We are seeing a huge sort of investigations and huge sort of demands which are coming. So I think this is all we want to say. Probably we are not done justice to couple of concepts. We have to spend a little more time, but we wanted to keep some time open for you all to ask questions. That's all so far. Now I will ask Monaz or and her team to kind of if they can let us know what are the questions.
Hello. We now start with our Q&A session. The first question to our panelists is as follows. What are the recent trends in the country of origin in light of the Indo-China conflict?
Rinku, you want to take it up or shall I tell? Okay. See, India is not having any FTA with China. In fact, if you see with China, India is imposing anti-dumping duty, and a lot of safeguard duties and a lot of other duties are there. There are some FTAs with respect to some South Asian country for some specific things, but per se with China, we don't have a sort of a general FTA to sort of this, and we are not anticipating that it is going to be any FTA with a country like China in days to come. Probably there may be some FTA US, but that also depends how the new government is basically going to come up.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is on bonded warehouse. Could you clarify whether bonded warehouse is a must for manufacturers to avail of this deferment facility?
Yes, you should get a private bonded warehouse license under Section 58, and you should also get a permission under Section 65 of the Customs Act from the Commissioner. There is a detailed form which is being given. Probably they will make a personal visit to your FT to see how the setup are and what are the mechanisms you have in place with respect to inventory management and what all the operations you are going to do. 58 license permission is needed.
All right. We have another question from our audience. It's again related to the country of origin. Is it necessary for 6-digit change of HSN code to qualify as goods produced in the country with which we have FTA, for example, Singapore?
Yeah, as I said, with Singapore itself, if we see the rules of origins for Singapore, the treaty, it is specifically saying that the HSN code has to be aligned as per the Indian customs regulations. So if you are, if you are using the global 6-digit, which is the global standard, the customs may dispute that, and they may, insist you to have a 8-digit classification. And in fact, the country of origin certificate, which you have to be, if you want to be, which will be producing before the customs, they may dispute that, this is not as per the rules which the Indian government has laid down. So probably if you are going to have a 6-digit, then you may be facing a little bit challenge. Yeah. And just to add upon that,
Okay.
the first question regarding the China, I think there are with China, but with Hong Kong there are some treaties, the free trade agreements, and there is a dispute that Hong Kong is China or not. So that probably could be something which someone can look into, but definitely, as I said, not with China. It's not going to happen anything. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Rinku. Our next question goes as follows. How is the value addition on certificate of origin calculated? Is it 35% of the invoice value? Could you clarify?
So, yeah, so just to answer that question, I think in what the new rules they have introduced is just to put the onus on the importer, and whatever conditions, whatever the benchmarks, the criteria, value addition, be it value addition, HSN code or anything, that will be followed as per the respective free trade agreements with the specific countries. Because the value addition concept, whether it is 35 or 50, it will depend upon the product which you are importing, and also from which country you are going to import. So that will entirely depend upon the free trade agreement, whatever from which country you are importing, and the respective notifications which they have been laid down. And also there in the notifications, which if you'll see, they have specifically mentioned in some of the goods that what is the in case of some goods, how you would say that there is a value addition or not. If I just give an example, if you say fish, if you are importing fish, let's say the fish you are importing from Singapore, and the fish was originally taken out in say let's say Taiwan, and then you have frozen that fish in Singapore, and then you are importing. So they have also put down certain kind of restrictions that this will not amount to origin. Okay, so one needs to go and see the free trade agreement in detail, and then you can probably find out what is the value addition concept or not, whether it is 30.
Just to add what Rinku said, this country of origin thing, huge amount of engagement is needed with your vendors now, because if your vendors are not board with you, for you to take the bit of free trade agreement under those respective FTA notification is going to be a big issue. And for bring your vendors on board, you should also first be clear what are requirements, and that form 1 what Rinku mentioned in our in his discussion. If you go through the form, the requirements are huge. It is as if you have to know everything he is doing there. And we saw even in a related party transaction, people are not willing to share that much information. I think a huge amount of engagement is needed.
Okay. We have two more questions. One is, can you please confirm whether the interest on customs duties when material is cleared for local consumption, say 12 months after imports? What is the interest on customs duties? Yeah.
Kindly repeat.
The question is, yeah, I will. The question is as follows. Can you please confirm whether one, the interest on custom duties when material is cleared for local consumption, say 12 months after imports, and two, does repackaging a material also qualify as assembly under customs definition?
Good question. The 12-month criteria was there earlier. Now there is no time limit. In the earlier regulations, what it used to be, that sort of a thing is not there. So there is no time. If you are using it for manufacture, if you are using it for trading, then definitely after 3 months, your interest liability will not. But what is trading? What is manufacture? I gave you example of a toolkit, not a trading. But that also in a case-to-case basis, one has to definitely see that. And second question, you said whether assembly will amount to manufacture. Certainly assembly will amount to manufacture, but whether the packing repacking will amount to manufacture, we have to kind of see that what exactly that operations have been done. Unless we see those operations very clearly, we will not be able to sort of comment. I don't want to give a immature answer on this particular thing, but there is a possibility. It's not that in every case it will be.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sachdeva. We have one last question.
Yes.
Yes, 1 second. Can you give me a minute? Could you briefly clarify about taxes and duty impact during and after COVID at customs? Would there be any impact?
So far as custom is concerned, there is no change. Only what they have done with respect to they extended some time limits, etc., for issuing the notice or filing appeals. And in certain segments, some rates of few products which are used for which is having some medical medical values kind of things. There have been some sort of recession which has come, and there have been some ban also for import and export depending upon from which country is coming and which phase those things are. In between, there was a ban for export of even masks from India. So per se, I have not seen any specific trend, but yes, the talks are on. The whole automobile industry is they are up in the arms to go to the government to get some relaxation on the GST side and also on a custom side. But per se, I have not seen any specific trend so far. So it's more of a status quo as of today, barring few sectors.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Sachdeva and Rinku, for your informative and relevant answers. With that question, we bring the Q&A session to an end. If anyone from the audience has further questions, we will answer these offline. I now ask my colleague, Ms. Monaz, to proceed with the vote of thanks. Yes, you would like to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say if there are still any questions, people can either email to you or they can email to us,
Yes.
whatever way they feel comfortable.
All right, yeah. Monaz would like to now proceed with the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dorel. A very good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce, I would like to extend a very hearty thank you to our speakers for today, Sachdeva and Mr. Panbode, for sharing with us the important key takeaways on customs and GST, a topic which never ceases to surprise us, but at the same time requires our constant attention and care. Thank you for being so comprehensive and so brief about it and adhering to our 1 hour norm. So we truly, truly appreciate that.
Thank you.
On the other hand, I would like to take this opportunity to just quickly announce to our audience that the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce is organizing the German Days Digitalis, a digital experience from the 3rd to the 7th of October. This is a digital campaign under the umbrella concept of German Days in India. And it is a first of a kind digital confluence of presentations, discussions, networking, and showcasing for the German industry. So please stay tuned. We will be sending you the visitors link. Participation is free. So please do come on board. In addition, I wish to express my gratitude to my IGCC team, Meera, Sana, Phyllis, Honey, Dorel, for your constant support and involvement. And finally, you, dear audience, for your gratitude, feedback, encouragement, and all your calls. The questions that have not been answered will be shared with Rinku and Sandeep, and they will get back to you in an individual capacity. So everything cannot be covered in 1 hour, and this topic is so vast that it could go on and on. But please be rest assured, these two gentlemen will definitely get back to you. So having said that, I wish you all a wonderful evening and have a nice day. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, audience.
Thank you.